Hi everyone, Sarah here from Sarah Homfray Embroidery. Welcome to another video. So there's a lot of you watching this channel that are new to embroidery and you're just starting out on your embroidery adventures. So I thought this would be a really good opportunity to recap some stitches that I think every embroiderer should know. So I've got 12 stitches that I am going to show you, and I'm going to run over them quite quickly because we do have full-length videos on all of these and loads more as well besides, and they're in our Stitch Library playlist, so I'll put that up at the end of this video and you can go and check that out and see what else we have in there. Do keep watching to the end of the video though, because once I've shown you those stitches, I'm going to show you how you can put those into a simple design. I'm going to use this one here, and I'm going to give you this design for free as well if you want to have a go, so do keep watching to see how you can get your hands on that. So let's have a look at those stitches. So running stitch is very simple stitch, just straight forward all the time with one straight stitch and then a small gap between the stitches. So the gap should be smaller than the stitches, but just try to keep those gaps consistent with each other and the stitch lengths consistent with each other as well. And it's just working forward, up and down through the fabric to make a running stitch. So now I'm going to work a back stitch, so it looks a bit similar to the running stitch, but now we join those stitches up together, and you can see that I'm coming up in the fabric ahead of myself and I'm taking my needle down next to that previous stitch. That helps ensure that I don't damage the thread by poking the needle through it. So I'm coming up ahead of myself, going back towards the previous stitch, sharing that hole, bringing the needle down, and that makes one continuous line of stitching. Very versatile stitch this, so a really great one to know. And it gives you a nice solid line, but quite a delicate line as well, which can come in really useful. So the last stitch down into the hole. So now I'm going to do a woven back stitch. So I've already put the back stitch in, you can see that there, and I'm just going to do the woven with a different colour so you can see what effect that makes. And I've come up at the end of that row of stitching and I've gone underneath the stitches. Now you can try and get the eye of the needle through if you want. This needle's a bit big, so I'm just going to go through with the point, but be careful the point doesn't catch on the thread because you're not going through the fabric now, you're just going underneath those back stitches. And don't pull it too tight, you want that nice edge to show, that nice decorative edge to show, and you can see just picked up a bit of the fabric there, so make sure you just go under that stitch and you can see how beautiful that pattern is that's emerging. Now, really beautiful sort of textured effect if you want something a bit more decorative in your work. Just try and ensure that the tension's even all the way throughout, so those little woven parts look the same. And then just to finish that off, down at the end of the row of your stitching to finish your thread. It's going to do a whipped back stitch now, so I put my back stitch in already, and again I'm using that same colour so you can see the effect. And we're going to go through these stitches, so underneath those back stitches, but from the same side each time now, so we're whipping the thread around the back stitches. You can go from left to right or right to left, it doesn't matter, but just stay on the same side each time and just go underneath those stitches, and you get a kind of candy stripe, so that can be really nice effect depending on what colours you use. And then again, just to finish that off, needle through to the back and you can finish your thread on the back. So I'm going to do a stem stitch for this stitch. So it's a forward stitch, and you can just see I'm making a loop to the right there, coming up between those two stitches. So there's my loop. Now we come up at the end of the previous stitch, which is in between the two ends of the loop, and pull it tight. Now this gives you a kind of a rope effect, so a little bit thicker than a back stitch. So if you want something a bit more substantial, this is a really nice one. Goes around curves beautifully as well. So forward stitch, the loop goes to the right for stem stitch, and pull it tight. You can just see how each stitch overlaps the previous stitch. It's just a slightly different view, so you can see what that's doing. You can see that rope effect forming now because each one overlaps the previous stitch. And then to finish, just take it through to the back. Now this one's an outline stitch, so it's the same as a stem stitch other than the loop now goes to the other side. So holding it to the left now, but otherwise I'm working exactly the same way, it's just the loop has changed sides. And this just gives you an opposite looking stitch. So we've again got the rope effect, but it's going to twist the other way now. And this is great if you want to go around a clockwise circle. The stem stitch is great for anti or counterclockwise. So if you were doing circles, you might want to consider using an outline stitch instead, depending on which way you're going, but otherwise they can look very similar, so I wouldn't worry too much about the difference. Just remember, once you've started the row, to always keep your loop to the same side. Right, this is a chain stitch, and you'll notice I'm coming down from the top for this one. It's much easier to work this stitch coming towards you, so when you tension it there, you can pull that thread down. So we're going into the same hole, making a loop up inside the loop, and just tension it downwards. Don't put it too tight, because otherwise the chain shapes disappear. So up inside, just gentle on that tension, down into the same place where you came out, inside that loop. So each chain is attached to the previous chain. You can see this one's a really nice textured stitch, so if you want something a bit more substantial, this one is great. And to finish it, you just need to take your needle down at the end so that chain doesn't come undone. Okay, so this is definitely one you want to get the hang of. We do have a whole video on it if you want to learn this really in depth, because it can be a little bit tricky till you get the hang of it, but I'll just show you here. So we're going to bring our thread up where we want our knot to sit. We wrap the thread around the needle goes back into the fabric, pull that stitch tight, and then take it through to the back to form your knot. You can go round twice if you want to. If you want a slightly bigger knot, pull that tension on that thread there. That's the key to it. So wrap twice, needle in, tension on that thread, pull the needle through to the back. So another way of having a larger knot is a colonial knot. So we're going to scoop under that thread first, then we're going to wrap it around the needle. So it's like a French knot with an extra stage to it. So I'll show you one more of those. Scoop under, wrap the thread around, needle goes in, pull the stitch tight, pull the needle through to the back. Okay, so let's look at a bit more of a decorative stitch now. So this is a fly stitch. I've just marked in my lines to guide me, but this one's going to come up and down either side of it. Now it doesn't matter if you come up on the left or the right first, because you're just going to make that loop. So a little bit like an open chain stitch. And then we're going to just do single ones first. So up on the left, down on the right, make a loop, come up inside the loop, tension it downwards, pull it towards you. Do a little stitch to hold that V shape down, and they look like little flies. And those are single fly stitches, so what we can do now is we can join them up. We can join them together, and this makes an open fly stitch. So I'm just going to come up level with the bottom of the V shape. And the stitch is formed exactly the same way, but now we're going to come up at the end of that previous stitch and join the stitches together. So I'm still doing that little holding stitch to hold it down, come up level with the centre, down on the right, and then back up at the end of that previous stitch. So that's an open one, but what we can also do is squash those stitches together and we can make a closed fly stitch. So I'm coming up right underneath that previous stitch now, again at the end of the bottom of that stitch, and you can see now what's happening. We're taking out all the gaps and we're just putting the stitches close to each other. So this is really great if you want a filling stitch and you want to use this stitch. So really versatile stitch to learn. So let's look at a blanket stitch now. So I've come out of the fabric where I want the stitch to start. This will be the bottom of the row. I'm going to make a kind of an open loop. So there's the loop, come up inside the loop, and I'm just tensioning it to the right slightly. I'm going to make a bit of a jump here. So this is the open version of this stitch. You can see each one's connected to the last one. So these big sort of loops wide apart, up inside the loop, tension it to the right. I'll do one more so you can see what that looks like. And then to finish that off, just going to stitch down the other side of that loop to hold it in place. That's important so it doesn't come undone. And then you can finish your stitch on the back. So very similar to the blanket stitch is buttonhole stitch. So it's worked in exactly the same way, but now you can see how I've squashed my stitches up together. I'm going right down next to that previous stitch, working it in the same way, still doing my loop, coming up in the loop, tension to the right. But these stitches are now right next to the previous stitch, and this is going to make a solid shape. So again, a really versatile stitch, and you can do loads of different things with this stitch. Got a video all about that showing lots of variations of this, but these two are really worth knowing because you can have a nice open decorative stitch, and now you can have a really solid stitch. So if you want to fill an area in, and it can be any shape, you can follow the shape with this. And then again, just to finish it off, you do one more up inside the loop right next to that previous stitch, stitch down the other side of that loop there, just to finish that thread and hold that stitch in place. So I've made this little snail design for you, which I showed you briefly earlier. This is the PDF for the design. I'll put this on the free stuff page on the website. You can click the link in the description below this video, and you can click on that, go to the website, and you can download this, and you can have a go on this design with these stitches or with any technique you want to. If you're a bit more advanced and you want to try something else, that's there for you to use. And cats to sit on. Not hanging around. So I'm just going to show you how I fitted those 12 stitches into that snail design. Now, you wouldn't normally use 12 stitches necessarily in a small design. 5 or 6 might be good. If you're interested in how to choose stitches for an embroidery design, we have a video on that. You can check that out up here. Explains a bit more detail the process that I use to choose some embroidery stitches, but I just want to show you how I've done it on this design here. So this is my little snail design. Quite a simple design, but you can see how effective it is just with using those stitches that I've shown you today. And I'm just going to show you where I've put what stitch, just starting with the one we started with. So I started quite nice and simple, and we got a little bit more tricky. So a running stitch here, just put around his body underneath here. It's quite good if you want to put some stitching in, but you don't want a really solid shape. You just want to emphasize the shape a little bit without a really solid line in it. And then I've got the back stitch was the next one we did. So again, a back stitch is good if you just want to make a line but you don't want it to be really textured. You can see how this side's quite textured. This side just sits back back a little bit. So I've just picked that stitch to go up there just to indicate the side of the stem of the toadstool there. Then we did a what's next, a woven back stitch. Now this makes a really beautiful edge, and I thought that was perfect for the bottom of him here to do this, sort of emphasize this shape that they have underneath. You do your straight back stitch and you weave in and out, and that gives you this beautiful shape. So if you wanted an edge with a bit of a frilliness to it, this one is a really nice stitch for that, and I just stopped that on there. So then we did the whipped back stitch, and I did this one in the same colour, and I went around the top of the body here for that. Makes a bit more of a solid line, something that you can see a little bit more, and nice and curved shapes as well this makes. If you've got a curve to go around, this is a really good one to use for that. So we had our stem stitch and our outline stitch, so essentially work the same way, but one's a mirror image of the other one. And I used both of those in the toadstool here. So I used the outline stitch around the head of the toadstool in this nice red, pinky red colour, and this stem stitch down the stem. So down this outside here, so it makes the outside line a bit thick, and we've got the back stitch on the inside, and that just gives that a little bit of definition. Then we had a chain stitch. This one's quite a chunky outline sort of a stitch, so I did the shell in this one to make this one look a little bit more solid, and I just repeated this and changed the colours. So even just changing the colours throughout can make a difference as well, and started with a dark one, got towards light just to give that a little bit of shading. So just did the shell in all of these, and then put this little row of chain stitch just to kind of give a bit of an emphasis of a bit of shading and a different colour. So one stitch can look very different depending on how you stitch it and what colours you use. Then we had our French knots here and our Colonial knots here. So I just did a mixture of those in the top here. So the smaller ones are the French knots, just wrap once, and then the larger ones are the Colonial knots. So if you do want to make your knot larger, think about using a Colonial knot instead, because that makes a really nice textured knot in your work. So then we've got our fly stitch and our different variations. So we've got open ones and the closed ones, and I put those down the stem here, and I've actually done them the opposite way around to the sample. So I put them really tight together at the top here, something quite solid to stick the head of the toadstool on. Looks quite nice. It sort of gives it a little bit of depth and a bit of weight to it. And I did close together here, and then I separated them out as I got to the bottom, and this got wider and the stitches got wider as well. So just quite a nice little detail, and just a way that you can use these stitches to create a bit more texture. And lastly, we've got our blanket stitch, and when you put it together nice and tightly, you get your buttonhole stitch, so those two stitches together. So I used the blanket stitch around the bottom of the body here to create that texture around there, and then I did the buttonhole, so nice and tight together, underneath the toadstool. So this is the sort of inside of it if you're looking underneath, and by putting the stitches close together, create kind of a shading effect under there. So just how you can use the two different stitches very simply, just to say something different on your design. So if you're a beginner to embroidery and you're just starting your embroidery journey, I hope you found that helpful, and some stitches that are really good to know. Just practice them on a little bit of fabric till you're familiar with them, and they can come in again and again into all your embroidery projects. And don't forget that download that you can get from the website. The link's in the description below, and you can have a go at that little snail design for yourself. And you can check out our playlist here for the stitch library, where we have full-length videos of all of these stitches that I've done today, and loads more as well as well. So do check that out. Give the video a thumbs up if you've liked it, and we'll see you next time.